And that was the way it was back then. I mean, there was no such thing as planning permission. If you wanted to live somewhere, you just went out and you built it. I lived in a pineapple under the sea. And I was telling my grandson Shane the other day, and he said, "Granddad, that is impossible." And I said, no. I said there was no such thing as impossible back then. You just got out and you worked. And that's what I did. I got a job with Eugene the Cub Krabs. I knew him as Mr. Krabs. And I'd be serving patties and fries and things like that to everyone who lived in Bikini Bottom. And it did so well, that kind of place, he opened another one right beside it. And they interviewed him on the news. And they said, "What'd you do that for?" He says, "Well, I love money," he said. "I want loads of money." And I worked with a man called Squidward, and he was a Protestant man, but we were the best of friends. But by God, he was as crabby as a bag of snails. He was an old grump. And he'd be big into the food, to the elbows, and the things like that. And he lived right beside me, you know? And he was always complaining about the noise. He lived in a big stone head. And he'd always be saying, "SpongeBob, will you ever knock it off?" But we got along very well, you know, it didn't matter what he was or I was. We served everybody in there. We had mermaids, we had crustaceans, we had blowfish. We had all sorts of stuff. And Mr. Krabs, his daughter was a whale for some reason. And there was this other guy down the road. He had one eye in his head, and he was about 6 inches tall, and he was married to a computer called Karen. And he and Mr. Krabs, they didn't get along at all, but I didn't know what was going on there. And nobody put their nose in anybody else's business. And that's how they were with me and Patrick, you know? I knew him as my neighbor first. He was living down the road from me. We loved all the same things. You know, we go jellyfishing all the time, we go get ice cream, and we liked all the same music, all that kind of stuff. And then we started living together, and you know, I was with him for a long time. But you know, it was great in some ways under the sea, but in others it wasn't. We still had a king down there, so there were certain things you couldn't do. But then I heard on the surface that everybody was getting married. Everyone could get married in 2015. So when I heard that, I ran home to tell Patrick. But I saw him in the window, and he was getting old and a bit slow. So I didn't say anything. And I was afraid if we went up to the surface, he'd dry up. And there was one day when he was lying in the bed towards the end, and he turns over to me and he says, "SpongeBob, I'm sorry I was never your husband." And I said, "Patrick, what else were you? You looked after me. You made me feel safe. We went on all kinds of adventures, you and me. I didn't need any piece of paper to tell me that I was his, and he was mine. But you know, I don't go back there very often anymore. The house is gone now. It was a pineapple, it rotted away. But he's buried down there. But he's always with me, you know? So if I ever feel lonely, I'll put on the music. Like he's right there with me." Anyway, your mommy brought some soup. You want some soup?